reports that this man acted alone. They're acting out of precautions right now as those F-15 jets fly overhead, and they're being refueled, likely as we speak, by a tanker in the air.
Morgan, I'd like to go to Katie Stern. She's a photojournalist for us here at KOMO, and she just happened to be at SEA-TAC tonight when all of this unfolded. Katie, be our eyes and ears. Tell us what you saw and heard.
So it's actually been kind of interesting. It's awfully quiet inside the airport, and the folks at the gate were very reserved in the information that they were giving us. All we knew that it was a security issue. I, of course, went immediately to KOMO News, and that's when I learned what had happened. Nobody here is saying anything. Most of the passengers are just kind of milling about. Planes take off in the last 5 to 10 minutes or so. On top of that, our flight to New York to visit family has been now delayed by 2 hours. It keeps creeping up. At first it was a 20-minute delay, then it was an hour delay, then it was an hour and a half delay, now we're up to 2 hours. They've also been bouncing us around between gates, between the S gate, the A gate, the B gate, back to the S gate. So there's a lot of travelers that are taking those trains around in circles. Additionally, I'm starting to see for the departure screens, man, they're getting lit up with a lot of delays. So we're slowly seeing more and more and more delays. And we tried to get on another flight, and it was completely booked. So it kind of seems like all of us are just going to have to sit here in a little bit of a holding pattern while we wait for SEA-TAC to figure out exactly how they want to move forward.
Katie, if you can hear me, I have a question for you regarding the actions inside the airport. You mentioned that passengers were being taken from gate to gate. Describe that scenario. Was airport staff gathering everyone up in one gate and kind of herding them onto those trains to take them to an entirely different area?
No. It was definitely not a security. It was more a trying to get people to a runway with which they could board a plane. There was actually no conversation. There was no conversation by any of the airport employees. It was literally us just standing there and then suddenly seeing our gate change on the departure page of the big reader board that they have, and all of us making our own way over there. So there's been very little interaction between any airport employee and any of the passengers here. It's really calm and quiet. Honestly, you would not know anything had happened at all just by the atmosphere in the airport itself.
KOMO photojournalist Katie Stern giving us an inside perspective into how things are playing out. Katie, thanks so much for sharing. Keep us posted as you learn anything more, and hopefully you can get on that family trip sooner than later. But folks, that's just one passenger of hundreds, if not thousands tonight that will likely be making other plans as their flights have been impacted due to what you were looking on your screen right now, and that's what's left of a Horizon Q400 aircraft that crashed around 9 p.m. this evening after taking off illegally from SEA-TAC Airport at 8 p.m. At this point in time, Pierce County Sheriff has confirmed the only individual on board was what they're describing as a 29-year-old suicidal male whom they know. They are not sharing his name at this time.
And this just in from the FBI that just tweeted this out. They are communicating with local, state, federal partners, but it's too early, they say, for them to put out any details on what they call an evolving situation. They say that they frequently get involved with aircraft-related matters, so they are poised to act. And of course, with all aircraft incidents, the NTSB, their jump team, is probably en route as we speak. The FAA is certainly going to investigate this. In just short order here, we'll be speaking with John Nance. He is an ABC aviation analyst. In fact, I understand he's on the phone right now. So to get that perspective, let's get right to John. And John, the big question here that everybody has is, how does something like this happen?
Well, it's going to be the paramount question. Of course, if you've got somebody who, and we're making assumptions here, it's maybe suicidal or drunk, I suppose, maybe a little bit of both, and they are already empowered to be on the ramp. If they're already an employee and they're badged, we don't really have much of an opportunity to know directly that somebody has invaded the wrong place, especially if somebody knows if this is a mechanic. We're not sure of that, but that's the information that I'm hearing. Somebody who got in the cockpit knew exactly how to start the airplane, how to make it go, how to release the parking brake. In a situation like that, we are ripe for this sort of a situation, but it has, to the best of my knowledge, not happened before, not just at SEA-TAC, but any place around the country. And the reason why is that we vet our people very well. All the airlines do.
So somewhat of uncharted territory here indeed. And again, we are, like you, hearing from authorities that this was a mechanic, 29-year-old resident from Pierce County. The sheriff's office definitely describing this man as a suicidal male. As a mechanic, do you have that kind of access at an airport to get into, as we've been reporting here, a Q400 Horizon Air and take off without anybody noticing?
Well, our mechanics, speaking for any airline, I'd be saying the same thing, but with Alaska and Horizon, these folks are very well trained. By the way, we couldn't be flying airlines without them because they keep the airplanes in good shape. So they're a mainstay of the operation, and they know how they have to taxi the airplanes back and forth to hangars and so on. It's not surprising that knowledge would be there. They don't know how to fly. At least if somebody's a private pilot, that's one thing, but this is a much more sophisticated airplane. So, again, we were faced with the fact here that if these allegations are as they have been reported, i.e. a mechanic, i.e. suicidal, etc., and the individual was a current employee who was empowered to be where he was, that's the worst nightmare scenario outside of having a terrorist.
Right, John, good point there. And just to be clear on that, we're told by Pierce County Sheriff that this is not, there is no longer a terrorist threat, nor do they consider this a terrorist act, just the actions of one individual at this time. John, I was curious to ask you, and you may have touched on it earlier, as far as security clearances go, we know what it takes for a pilot, but for a mechanic to have access, what kind of steps are in place to be granted that proximity to where they can enter these planes as this man did tonight?
There's a pretty good vetting process that goes on all the time. First of all, before anyone is brought on and is allowed to get near an airplane once they're hired, they go through a lot of training, a lot of recurrent training. There is always an element of observation of other people. We certainly do this as pilots too. We're kind of watching each other, not as a pejorative, but just we're aware of each other. And of course, to get the badges, you've got to do certain things and jump through certain hoops. But we're dealing with human beings. I'm an Air Force pilot veteran, and we had a thing in the Air Force that Navy did too, that we used for many, many, many years, decades. In fact, it was successful, called the Human Reliability Program, and it had to do mostly with nuclear weapons. But the basic idea was no lone zone, and no fewer than two people were ever allowed near a nuclear weapon or a big machine of one sort or another. And where one person goes off and does something by themselves, we don't have that kind of backup, and we really are vulnerable to it. There's no recommendation in here right now. We don't know enough about what happened tonight. But the only other situation that I know of that is anything like this was way back many years ago, decades ago in Honolulu, when somebody stole an old B-25 and terrorized the downtown area in Honolulu until they finally managed to land the thing. He was drunk as a skunk, ended up in prison for 10 years, and fortunately didn't kill anybody.
Talk to us, if you will. Excuse me. Talk to us, John, if you will, about the response by the military, the Air Force, and the F-15s that scrambled here, and the job that they did.
Well, if they came out of Portland, then these guys really deserve some tremendous credit. Wherever they came from, they were rapidly on the scene. My understanding is that they probably kicked in the burners, flew supersonic to get up here, and it's about 140 miles, so you can traverse that inside of about 10 minutes, maybe a little less. Their job, of course, is extremely difficult because they've got to try to not only keep these airplanes tracking the one that they're after they find him, but they've also got to be in touch with their commanders, and if there appears to be any sort of nefarious intent by the individual flying the airplane, then you can end up with snap communications all the way back up to the Pentagon. Very much like we had an incredibly rapidly put together situation in 9/11. Whether these guys were armed or these gals were armed or not, I don't know. Probably they were, because they stood alert down at Portland International as part of our Air Force Reserve. But at any rate, the fact that they got on the scene as fast as they did, and that they were able to hang with this airplane, which wasn't going very fast. The Q400, by the way, can do about 340 knots, I believe it is, and stall speed's probably down around 95 to 100. And the F-15, the stall speed is higher than that. It's really difficult to hang in the sky at under about 150.
And John, good point. And we're actually learning a little bit about the F-15s here that were used tonight from Pierce County Sheriff, saying that they made it within a few minutes of the theft of plane, and those pilots kept the plane out of harm's way and people on the ground safe. The Pierce County Sheriff said that they may not admit it for a few days, that being the Air Force, but it is true, giving the credit to those Air Force pilots who were up in the air, as you mentioned, at a moment's notice, intercepted this rogue plane and kept it away from those populated areas. You'll remember, as we showed video earlier, that it was still relatively light outside, and those people were able to shoot video on their phones of the plane flying overhead. And then, fortunately, those planes were able to take it out over the water into a rural area, and that's where this plane, after circling Ketron Island for what appeared to be on that flight path we saw earlier, at least a dozen times before it went down. And John, you made a good point earlier, talking about just the skills of a mechanic, how they would understand how a plane works, but not necessarily the finer points. And I think that flight path might have explained that. And the big question right now is, was that erratic flying a result of stunts or just inexperience being in the air? And that's one of the questions hopefully this investigation will answer sooner than later.
Absolutely. I think probably a combination of both. And as some people think, because of the radio transmissions and a little slurred speech, if liquor was involved, that makes it even more difficult to fly a straight path.
And that said, John, talk a little bit. I don't want to minimize this emergency. We don't know if there are any casualties on the ground other than the pilot. We assume that the man that hijacked the plane, the suicidal man described by the Pierce County Sheriff's Office as 29-year-old, did not survive this, but we don't know. That's not confirmed. But the fact that this crashed in such a wooded area on an island, somewhat of a remote island, what does that tell you? To me, it certainly says that this could have been much worse.
Well, yes, there's no question that it could have been much worse in so many different ways. I mean, first of all, this individual could have crashed into a very high, densely populated area, Tacoma, even the Stilicum area. A lot of different possibilities for great harm. In addition, of course, if this was somebody who was possessed of nefarious intent and this was a terrorist situation, then they could have moved downtown Seattle, and we could be looking at having our individuals flying the two F-15s faced with a really, really tough decision of whether or not to shoot down an airplane, which is the ultimate reason that those guys and gals are in the air.
All right, John Nance, aviation expert for ABC and for KOMO News. You live in the area. We appreciate your time, your availability, and your expertise. We may call on you again tonight, but thank you so much for your time right now.
At this point, thank you, John. At this point, I want to go live to Tammy Mutasa. We're working to get Tammy Mutasa live. We do know that she is inside SEA-TAC Airport there at the baggage area. We do have KOMO's Matt Markovich, and just to explain what you're looking at your screen right now, on the left is a live view of the wreckage of this crashed airplane that was illegally commandeered from SEA-TAC Airport around 8 tonight. On the right, that is its erratic flight path before it crashed there on Ketron Island. We do know that KOMO's Matt Markovich is now available. Matt, fill us in, tell us where you are and what you've learned.
Well, we're on the grassy knoll that overlooks the cell phone lot, if you're familiar with the airport. We're on the north side of the airport. But I can tell you, it's just a mess out here. Take a look at the lot. Now, normally it's a Friday night, so it's going to be busy. But this lot, people are circling around. It's backed up. The side streets are backed up. The road that leads into SEA-TAC is full of cars parked on there. Everyone's waiting to pick up something. And I'm going to try and see if Thomas can see this. See all the tails of all the Alaska flights, the planes backed up, waiting for a gate. And I see 3 or 4 backed up just on the north terminal right now. Everything is backing up, trying to find a gate. If we go over a little bit closer to what's the sea gates, it's kind of far from here. But on the other side, at the end of the sea gates, way up at the end, is where the Horizon flights normally depart and pick up the passengers and unload the passengers. You can't see it from here. But this is the time of night when those Q400s come in, and a lot of them park for the night, and they get shut down. Mechanics go through the area, they clean the planes, and we're not sure if that's where the plane originated from, or it could have happened from the very south end of the airport, which Alaska has a maintenance hangar. But that's where the planes normally are, and there are mechanics that run up and down with their tugs, checking the planes at this time of day. Not sure, but that's exactly where those Q400s would take off for Alaska. But just kind of give you an overview if you're coming out here. It is crazy. Cars are driving around in circles, not sure what's going on. Again, it's a typical Friday night. It's busy, but this added confusion with the cancellations and movement of gates that Katie Stern was talking about. You have a lot of people on their cell phones down here.